5 children went to bed on Christmas Eve. By morning, they were gone. No screams, no bodies, no explanation. Imagine waking up on Christmas morning, not to the smell of cookies or the laughter of your kids tearing into gifts, but to the smell of smoke. Your house is burning. You run, you scream their names. 4 of your children make it out, but 5 of them don't. Now here's where this story takes a turn most people never see coming. Their bodies were never found. Not a single bone, not a tooth, not a trace of ash. This isn't a ghost story. This isn't a movie. This happened in 1945 in Fayetteville, West Virginia, and to this day, nobody knows what really happened to Maurice, Martha, Louis, Ginny, and Betty Sodder. Buckle up, because this is one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American history, and I promise you, the deeper we go, the stranger it gets. Before we get to the fire, you need to understand who these people were, because that background, it's going to matter a lot later. George Sodder was originally named Giorgio Soddu. He was born in Sardinia, Italy, and he immigrated to the United States alone at just 13 years old. His older brother left with him, but turned right around at Ellis Island and went back to Italy, leaving a teenager to fend for himself in a foreign country with nothing but determination. George built something out of that nothing. He worked the Pennsylvania railroads, saved his money, moved to West Virginia, and eventually started his own trucking company hauling coal and freight. He married a woman named Jenny Cipriani, also an Italian immigrant, and together they built a family, a big one, 10 children. By 1945, they were living 2 miles outside Fayetteville in a 2-story timber frame house. Their oldest son, Joe, was off serving in the military. That left 9 kids under one roof: John, Marion, George Jr., Maurice, Martha, Louis, little Jenny, Betty, and 2-year-old Sylvia. On the surface, this was a happy, hard-working American family. But George Sodder had a habit that made certain people in town very, very uncomfortable. He had opinions about Mussolini, loud ones. George was openly and aggressively critical of Italian fascism, which in a town with a large Italian-American community made him enemies. One of those enemies was a business associate we'll call Nick, a man who had been close enough to George to co-sign his home insurance policy. But after their falling out over politics, Nick had reportedly shouted at George, "Your damn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to pay for the dirty remarks you've been making about Mussolini." George brushed it off. People say things in anger. He shouldn't have brushed it off. Christmas Eve, 1945. The Sodder house is warm and full of life. The younger kids are too excited for Santa to sleep, playing with new toys from the local dime store. Marion, the eldest daughter, stays up to watch over them. Maurice and Louis go out to feed the farm animals in the freezing cold before bed. One by one, the house quiets. George and Jenny turn in early, taking little Sylvia with them to the first-floor bedroom. The older kids, John, Marion, and George Jr., are upstairs. The 5 younger ones, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny, and Betty, share a separate upstairs room. Then, at 12:30 in the morning, the phone rings. Jenny stumbles out of bed to answer it. On the other end, a woman's voice, strange, laughing, almost mocking, asking for someone who doesn't live there. "Wrong number," Jenny says, and hangs up. She notices something odd. The lights are still on, the front door unlocked, the curtains wide open. She sighs, assumes the kids forgot to lock up, does it herself, and goes back to bed. Then she hears it. a thump on the roof, followed by a rolling sound like something landing and sliding off. She tells herself, just an animal. And then the smell hits her. Smoke. In seconds, she's screaming for George, grabbing Sylvia and bursting out of the house into a house already filling with flames. She lunges for the phone to call the fire department. Dead. The line is completely dead. The staircase is impassable. The heat is suffocating. But two of the older kids, John and George Jr., managed to stumble down through the smoke, hair singed. They tried to reach the younger children's room, they sob. They couldn't get in. George races around the house for the ladder he always keeps propped against the wall. It's gone. He runs to the garage, tries both of his coal trucks. Neither starts, despite working perfectly the day before. He tries the rain barrel, frozen solid. All he can do is scream his children's names into the inferno. The fire department, just 2.5 miles away, doesn't arrive for 7 hours. By the time they do, Christmas morning, the house is ash, not a wall standing. And when firefighters search the ruins for the bodies of 5 children, nothing. Not one bone, not one tooth, not one piece of recognizable remains. Fire Chief F.J. Morris declares the children dead. A coroner's jury rules the fire accidental within 2 days. A state inspector blames faulty wiring. Case closed. George Sodder stands in the ash of his home and feels something he can't quite name yet. He will name it soon enough. Something is wrong. Spring comes. The Sodders begin rebuilding nearby. The fire site will remain a memorial garden. That's when a telephone repairman climbs the pole near the property and finds something that changes the entire case. The phone line wasn't melted by the fire. It was cut, cleanly, intentionally. Someone needed a ladder to reach it. George's mind races. He sprints across the property and digs through debris near a drainage ditch, and there it is, his missing ladder. Not burned, not destroyed, moved and hidden. Now, the whole picture shifts. Someone cut the phone lines before the fire to stop them from calling for help. Someone hid the ladder to stop George from reaching his children's windows, and both trucks were sabotaged to make sure nobody could improvise an escape route. And then Jenny remembers something that the official investigators never accounted for. The lights were on when they fled the house. If the fire had been caused by a faulty electrical shorts, the power would have failed. The house would have gone dark, but it was bright, which means the electricity was working when the fire started. Faulty wiring didn't do this. Someone did. Then the evidence gets even more jaw-dropping. A bus driver comes forward. He claims that while driving past the Sodder home on the night of the fire, he saw someone throwing what he described as balls of fire at the house. Weeks later, 2-year-old Sylvia wanders across the yard and picks up a strange object from the brush where the snow has melted. George takes it from her tiny hands and doesn't recognize it, but his son John, just home from the army, does. It's an incendiary grenade, a military device specifically engineered to start fires. That thump on the roof Jenny heard, the rolling sound, that wasn't an animal. Someone threw a grenade onto the roof of a house full of sleeping children. You'd think that a military weapon found at the scene would force the police to reopen the case. It didn't. Not even close. Here's where the mystery cracks open into something almost impossible to process. In 1946, a woman who works at a roadside restaurant several hours from Fayetteville comes forward to police. She says the morning after the fire, she served breakfast to a group of children who matched the Sodder kids' descriptions. A car with Florida license plates was parked outside. Shortly after, a second woman working at a hotel in Charleston, West Virginia, reports that approximately a week after the fire, 4 children matching the descriptions checked in around midnight with a group of Italian-speaking adults who seemed unfriendly and controlling. Think about what this means if true. Someone set the house on fire as a distraction, a cover, while the children were removed. Maybe through the window, maybe down a ladder that was later hidden. Maybe they were awake and playing when it happened. Maurice, the oldest, was 14. If any of them could have been coerced or lured outside in the chaos, it was the kids who were still up when the fire started. And remember that strange phone call at 12:30 a.m., the wrong number? One theory is that it wasn't a wrong number at all. It was someone confirming the family was home, checking they were in position. The Sodders begin to believe the fire wasn't meant to kill the children. It was meant to destroy any evidence that the children had been taken. The Sodders hire a private investigator. His name is C.C. Tinsley, and what Tinsley uncovers is the kind of thing that makes you distrust every official story you've ever been told. Fire Chief Morris, the man who declared the children dead, later admitted to burying a box on the Sodder property. He told people it contained a human organ found in the ashes, a heart. The Sodders dig it up. They open it. Inside is beef liver, not burned, not from the fire, deliberately planted. Morris admitted he faked the evidence himself, claiming he only wanted to give the grieving family closure. It is one of the strangest, most inexplicable things in this entire case. That business associate, Nick, the one who threatened George over Mussolini, he had secretly increased the value of George's home insurance policy by $250 right before the fire, without George's knowledge. As a co-signer, Nick stood to benefit financially if the family died. And yet, Nick sat on the coroner's jury, the very jury that ruled the fire accidental, the jury that could have recommended him as a suspect. When the Sodders bring all of this to the local prosecuting attorney, he looks at the evidence and responds, "I don't want to bring a case against people with whom I live and eat." The system had failed them, completely, deliberately, and they had absolutely nowhere left to turn. In 1949, 4 years after the fire, the family re-excavated the site and found 4 vertebrae, just 4, buried in the fill dirt George had brought in to cover the ruins. The Smithsonian Institution later analyzed them. The bones showed no evidence of fire exposure. They were likely in the fill dirt from an entirely separate location. They proved nothing. In 1953, with no other options, the Sodders do something almost cinematic in its desperation. They erect a billboard on Route 16, a major highway outside Fayetteville. On it, 5 photographs, 5 solemn faces staring out at every car that passes. Above the photos, the words, "What was their fate? Kidnapped? Murdered? Or are they still alive?" Below, a $5,000 reward. That billboard stood for nearly 40 years. George and Jenny spent the rest of their lives chasing every lead, every letter that arrived claiming a sighting, every newspaper photo of a child that might, just might, be one of theirs. George once traveled all the way to New York because a photograph in a newspaper showed a little girl he believed resembled one of his missing daughters. Her family, understandably, refused to let a stranger examine their child. He went home with nothing. Then, in 1968, 23 years after the fire, Jenny opens an envelope with no return address. Inside is a photograph of a young man, perhaps 30 years old, dark hair, familiar features. On the back, someone has written 2 words, Louis Sodder. Louis would have been in his early 30s if he had survived. George and Jenny believed, deeply, completely, that this was their son. They added the photo to the billboard. They hung an enlargement of it over their fireplace. They hired another private investigator to track down whoever sent it, to go to Central City, Kentucky, where the postmark originated. He took their money and was never heard from again. George Sodder died in 1969. Jenny kept the billboard standing and kept searching for another 20 years. She died in 1989. Their youngest daughter, Sylvia, the toddler who found the grenade, continued to push the case publicly until she passed away in 2021. The billboard came down shortly after Jenny's death. The questions never did.
So what do we actually believe now, looking at all of it? Possible. Some forensic experts note that in intense structural fires, bone fragments can scatter or be missed in a poor investigation, and the 1945 investigation was shockingly poor. The firefighters didn't arrive for 7 hours. Evidence was disturbed. However, the Smithsonian's own analysis said that with 5 children and the burn duration of this fire, you would expect to find recognizable skeletal remains. There were none. This theory has the most circumstantial support. The cut phone lines, the hidden ladder, the sabotaged trucks, the incendiary grenade, the eyewitnesses who saw the children alive afterward, the mysterious photograph. The motivation? Retaliation against an outspoken critic of Mussolini, possibly orchestrated by organized elements within the Italian-American community, or even, as some have theorized, with ties to the Sicilian mafia. The children may have been taken to Italy, where they lived out their lives under different names, never knowing the full truth of who they were. The prosecutor who refused to act, the coroner's jury that included a known suspect, the fire chief who fabricated evidence, the FBI that refused to step in. At minimum, someone in a position of authority knew more than they ever admitted. Whether that was out of corruption, cowardice, or something darker, we may never know. What we know for certain, 5 children vanished on Christmas Eve, 1945. No remains, no justice, no closure.
Here's the thing about this case that keeps me awake at night. George and Jenny Sodder didn't destroy themselves through grief. They were destroyed by not knowing. They couldn't mourn because they couldn't be sure there was anything to mourn. Every false lead, every cruelty, every slammed door, that was a kind of torture that just kept going for decades. And at the center of all of it, 5 children. Maurice, 14, Martha, 12, Louis, 9, Jenny, 8, Betty, 5, staring down from a billboard on a West Virginia highway, asking every stranger who drove past the same impossible question. What was their fate? We still don't know. If you found this story as haunting as I did, share it. Someone out there might still have a piece of this puzzle. These cases don't close just because the parents are gone. I'll see you in the next one.